The medieval code of chivalry, which governed the conduct of knights, shaped European culture for centuries. Rooted in ideals of bravery, honor, and courtly love, chivalry was both a guiding principle for the warrior class and a source of inspiration for literature and folklore. However, by the early 17th century, this once-revered institution had begun to fade, a decline accelerated by socio-political changes and, perhaps most notably, Miguel de Cervantes' masterpiece, Don Quixote. This novel, published in two parts in 1605 and 1615, satirized the chivalric ideals that had once been held in high esteem, effectively dismantling the mythos surrounding knighthood. Through its protagonist, the delusional and comically idealistic Don Quixote, Cervantes exposed the anachronisms and impracticalities of chivalric traditions in a rapidly modernizing world. The publication of Don Quixote marked a turning point in the perception of knights and knighthood, signaling the end of chivalry as a viable social and cultural force. Chivalry originated during the medieval period as a code of conduct for knights, blending military prowess with virtues such as loyalty, courtesy, and honor. It was both a practical system for maintaining discipline among warriors and a romanticized ideal upheld by literature and courtly traditions. Texts such as Le Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory and The Song of Roland glorified knights as paragons of virtue, reinforcing their role as protectors of the weak and champions of justice. These stories not only entertained but also reinforced social norms, idealizing knights as noble figures committed to a higher cause. By the late Middle Ages, however, chivalry began to decline. The rise of centralized nation-states, the professionalization of armies, and the advent of gunpowder warfare rendered traditional knightly combat obsolete. No longer were knights the dominant force on the battlefield. Instead, they were increasingly relegated to ceremonial roles. Moreover, the rigid class structure that underpinned the chivalric order was eroding, as wealth and power became more accessible through trade and commerce rather than inherited aristocratic privilege. Amidst these changes, literature and philosophy began questioning the validity of the knightly ideal, setting the stage for Cervantes' critique in Don Quixote. Don Quixote tells the story of an aging nobleman, Alonso Quijano, who becomes obsessed with chivalric romances and decides to reinvent himself as the valiant Don Quixote. In his delusion, he embarks on a series of misadventures, mistaking windmills for giants, inns for castles, and peasant girls for noble ladies. His faithful yet pragmatic squire, Sancho Panza, provides a grounding contrast, embodying the growing skepticism of the era regarding chivalric ideals. Cervantes' novel serves as both a parody and an elegy for chivalry. On one level, it ridicules the absurdity of an outdated code of conduct, highlighting the ways in which blind adherence to chivalric ideals leads Don Quixote to folly and self-deception. His misguided attempts to restore justice often result in chaos, injury, and ridicule, underscoring the impracticality of chivalry in a world that has moved beyond its medieval origins. On a deeper level, Don Quixote is a melancholic reflection on the passing of an era. While the novel exposes the flaws of chivalry, it also acknowledges the nobility in Don Quixote's aspirations. His idealism, though misguided, represents a longing for a world governed by honor and virtue, even as reality proves increasingly cynical. This dual perspective, both mocking and mournful, made Don Quixote a powerful cultural critique, resonating with readers who recognize the shifting tides of history. The publication of Don Quixote had a profound impact on how knights and chivalry were perceived in European society. Cervantes' work demystified the knightly ideal, exposing it as a relic of the past rather than a guiding principle for the present. After Don Quixote, it became difficult to take the concept of knighthood seriously, at least in the traditional sense. The novel's success ensured that chivalric romances, once a dominant literary genre, became increasingly seen as naive, unrealistic, and even comical. This shift in perception had wider cultural and intellectual consequences. The Enlightenment, which followed in the 18th century, further dismantled medieval notions of honor and feudal hierarchy, replacing them with ideals of reason, individualism, and civic responsibility. Cervantes' critique of chivalry foreshadowed this transition, challenging the notion that virtue and social order should be based on outdated traditions. Instead of romanticizing a bygone age, European societies began to embrace new frameworks for defining heroism and morality, ones more aligned with the realities of their time. Moreover, Don Quixote influenced the development of modern literature by pioneering the novel as a form. Its self-aware narrative, psychological depth, and satirical edge set a new standard for storytelling, moving beyond the simplistic, moralistic tales of medieval chivalric romance. Later authors, from Voltaire to Dickens, drew upon Cervantes' techniques to craft more nuanced and realistic portrayals of human nature and society. The decline of chivalry as a social institution was inevitable, given the political, economic, and military transformations of the early modern period. However, the role of Don Quixote in accelerating this process should not be underestimated. By dismantling the myths surrounding knighthood, Cervantes provided a literary death knell for an outdated system of values. His novel ensured that, while knights and chivalry would remain part of historical memory, they would no longer serve as practical models for contemporary behavior. That said, the spirit of chivalry did not disappear entirely. Elements of the chivalric ideal, such as honor, bravery, and romantic idealism, persist in modern narratives, albeit in different forms. Superheroes, soldiers, and even political leaders often embody updated versions of the knightly archetype, adapted to fit modern sensibilities. Yet these figures are rarely as unquestioningly revered as the knights of medieval romances. Instead, they are frequently depicted with flaws and complexities, reflecting Cervantes' enduring influence on how heroism is portrayed. The publication of Don Quixote was a watershed moment in the cultural history of Europe, signaling the end of chivalry as a dominant social and literary ideal. Cervantes' masterful satire exposed the impracticality and anachronism of knighthood, reshaping public perception and paving the way for new ways of understanding heroism and virtue. While chivalry may no longer dictate societal norms, its legacy, filtered through Cervantes' lens, continues to shape literature and cultural imagination. In the end, Don Quixote's tragicomic quest serves as a lasting reminder of both the nobility and the folly of clinging to outdated ideals in a world that has moved on.